Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Reflection Connection podcast. I'm your host, Vince Jameson. So glad you can join me. So, today, this is episode 1, and I thought I would take a little time to just explain a little bit about myself, what the goals are, why I started this podcast, and what I hope to provide for you. This episode is episode number 1, and it's titled, Why Me and Why Now? So first, since this is going to be primarily a spiritually based podcast, I should start with my very eclectic spiritual background. I was born into a Roman Catholic family. We basically celebrated the major holidays. I celebrated my communion at the age of 7 or 8. And I remember going to confession, where you confess all of your sins. And I remember telling the priest that I went across the street with my best friend John, and we said terrible words, the F word and the S word. And we also took his mom's pepperoni and we fed the rats. We threw it down the hole in the in the lot across the street. So for that terrible act, I was told to say something like 10 Our Father prayers and 5 Hail Marys and be on my way. So this was the kind of the beginning for me. But I was always interested. I always had a kind of a connection to nature and I was a softer kid, definitely more sensitive, very sensitive to energy and to people and other people's emotions, very intuitive and empathic. When I got a little older, my parents got a divorce, and I went to live with my maternal grandmother and my 2 sisters. And we were living with her. She was a Reformed Jehovah's Witness. And so she would do Sunday teachings with me, and they were very fire and brimstone, rapture based. Didn't really resonate with it, but I found it interesting, and she was very passionate about it. She would watch all these preachers on TV. This was the 80s. And then a little while later, I went back to live with my mom, and she had started going to a born-again Christian church. And this was really interesting. I did like it because it just was very lively compared to what I was used to. It was tambourines and all kinds of music and, laying on of hands and speaking in tongues and a lot of really interesting stuff going on. There was a palpable energy in the place, I will say that. And her and I were actually baptized under the stage. The stage slid out and there was a baptismal pool, and we were wearing white t-shirts, long white t-shirts and white socks. It was a very interesting time. So that was age 14 with my mom. And then at around 15, I went to live with my dad. So back to Roman Catholic Church on Sundays. That was much more subdued. And for me, it was actually perfect because I was about to enter an explosion of rebelliousness and of coming into my own. And I was a wild child through my teens and into early 20s, going to clubs and raves and just to the max. In that time, though, during my teens, I want to say probably my later teens, I remember I used to sometimes watch on PBS, public broadcast channel on TV, for those of you who are outside of the US. And for those of you in New York, it was Channel 13. So yeah, I would watch sometimes documentaries, and they had Wayne Dyer, which was very big back then. And I came across a series called The Power of Myth with Joseph Campbell. Now, Joseph Campbell, for those who are unfamiliar, he was a professor at Sarah Lawrence College. He's deceased for a couple of years now, but he was a wonderful professor, and he was best known for speaking about the hero's journey. And he was the one who influenced George Lucas, who created the Star Wars series. So it was based on that, based on his work. So he created this wonderful series, The Power of Myth, and it was set up like an interview kind of style. And it had wonderful video clips. And basically, he was a professor that studied comparative religious studies. So where all of the different spiritual beliefs and myths come together, where they intersect, where they overlap. And that was the basis for this several-part miniseries, which I wound up buying on VHS tape, and then later on bought again on DVD, which I still have somewhere because it was that good. So anyway, Joseph Campbell, he was introducing to me this boy who has very limited input to other aspects of the world, all kinds of practices. So he was discussing Native American practices and migrating indigenous shamanistic practices, practices of Tibet and of India and different religions, Aboriginal dream time, and all kinds of these really wonderful practices which I hadn't had exposure to up to that point. I bring this up because later on, a couple of years later, I wound up finding myself perusing the bookstore in Manhattan, Barnes and Noble. I don't know if they still have physical bookstores anymore, but they had some wonderful ones in Manhattan, quite large, especially the one on 6th Avenue. I used to go in there quite a lot. And they had a very large aisle, several aisles of spirituality and different religions. And I would kind of, peruse through and just see what caught my eye and pick something up, put it back down, pick something else up. And because I had that background, I started looking into some of those practices which I hadn't had a lot of familiarity with, but I was interested in or felt drawn to because of the discussion. So to start out, I started looking into Native American history, Native American studies, their practices, medicine circles, and animal totems, and kind of the more broad spectrum, mainstream aspects to it, which then led into earth religions, which led into Wicca and witchcraft traditions, which are very diverse. Everything from, Victorian English all the way to those who incorporate a lot of different shamanistic practices, right? And then even those, then you can go into a lot of different aspects and different national origins of witchcraft. For those who don't know, too, the name witch has been horribly, horribly diminished and distorted over time. It actually refers to the wise, and specifically, or usually, the wise woman. But that's another conversation for another day, which we will absolutely be getting to. So I went down that road. And back then, we didn't have the internet, of course. This was the mid-90s. So everyone had a set of encyclopedias at home for reference, along with dictionaries. You had your libraries, which I never went to because I never liked the idea of everybody handling all of the books, and just not for me. Anyway, continued on that, and then continued just looking and exploring as time went on, very casually, just for myself. Usually again at the bookstore. So I picked up a deck of tarot cards and learned how to read tarot. Picked up some psychic intuition development books and different things like that. Came across the Course in Miracles. Came across a lot of different things, and I would pick them up and put them down, pick them up again, see how they fit into my life where I was then. There was one time which actually stands out, and I definitely want to share it because it was pivotal and it explains a lot of the decoration that you see behind me. So I was I actually remember exactly where it was. It was a different location, but I was working on the Upper East Side. And I went around the corner to Barnes and Noble, and they had several floors. It was more of a smaller but vertical type building. And downstairs in the bottom floor, there was all of the spiritual books and things like that. And I was walking through, and on display, it was open. The book was open. There was a photography book, and what I can gather from what I know now, it was a photography book of Tibet and primarily of Lhasa pre-invasion. And I had no exposure to Buddhism Lhasa, any idea of the history of it, any knowledge of that. They don't teach that in American history. In high school and then in college, I was in art school and design. And so, yeah, I had no exposure. And I remember just something drew me to it. And I was just flipping through the pages, flipping through. And the scene caught my eye, and I just became overwhelmed with emotion to the point that I was maybe 22, 23, very full of ego, very young. I was embarrassed. All of a sudden, I didn't know what was going on. I'm about to cry, and I'm just looking at this picture book, and I'm in the middle of a store, and I hope nobody sees me, right? So that was what was going on in my mind. And it was just so strong. It was just so hit me like a brick. And I walked away from it, and then I came back, and I decided to look some more. And then there was some books next to it that were also Tibetan Buddhist. I decided to look at that, and I was attracted to the iconography. I was attracted to the statues. And especially I was attracted to this one book, which I actually still own. I found it recently, called Yantras. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, yantras are symbolic representations of universal workings and universal concepts, I guess is a very clean way of saying it. Very somewhat similar in certain respects to certain magical geometric diagrams or sigils. These tend to be a little more formal in their construct, or I should say a little more universal, generally speaking. But they can also work the same way and be done the same way too for a particular being, etc. So, and to touch on that, a few years prior, I was actually visiting an old college friend that we used to get into a lot of trouble together. And I remember being at her apartment. We were drinking wine and just hanging out and catching up. And I got up at some point in the night, and it was just her and I. And I was perusing her bookcase, and I came across the Witch's Bible. And I opened it up, and it just caught my attention. And I was flipping through and then talking to her and flipping through to the point that she said, "Put that down, and you're creeping me out." And I was like, "No, I like it. I'm just like looking through." There was something about that. And I think it'll become obvious as we continue in the conversation. But there was something about that again, I had no prior reference for, but definitely pulled me in. There's definitely an energetic kind of resonance with what I was seeing and what I was coming across. And so this was something that I definitely wanted to look into a little more. Now that I was a little older and had a little more freedom and was a little more on my own and didn't have to really explain anything to anyone, and I could just do it on my own time and just do it casually, just for my own interest, right? So getting back to the Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, I picked up a couple of books. New York City is wonderful because it's such a huge hub. And so what I found was a lot of Tibetan monks would come in from different places and different monasteries, and they would, perform or do events, and they would also do like initiations at sometimes, and music. And, New York City has a lot of resources in that way. And so I was very privileged to be able to participate in some of them. But there was one in particular, the last one, where they were giving this initiation. And it was this particular Lama who was very high up. A Lama is more like I guess you could say, like a higher than a typical priest, if you will, than a typical monk. And, quite established in their learning and in their profound quality. So they were performing this, and I remember being interested, and I wanted to go along, right? But I'm like the New York native white guy trying to prostrate and watching, and I'm like, trying to follow along with them, to be respectful. And I also wanted to participate. And And everyone was taking this vow about to come back, this Buddha vow, which I've heard before. And, I vowed to come back until I'm going to paraphrase, but basically until all sentience is free of suffering. And I remember it was like quite vivid. I heard this voice, and I don't recall if it was outside or inside my perspective, but it was quiet, and I heard this voice just, you don't have to do this again. And even saying that, I'm like moved by it. I just, again, was like a heart open, movement. And I just got up, I sat there until it was a respectful time. And then when the dynamic, shifted, I got up and casually made my way to the exit and left. And I chose not to participate in those anymore. Not that there was anything wrong with it, and not that there was anything wrong with me doing it or anything. It's just I felt as much as I heard that. And I continued with, different practices. So from there, I started looking into, well, what is the history of Tibetan Buddhism? Where did it come from? And I found out that it came from basically a melding of the indigenous shamanic Bon practice, as well as the introduction generally from India, of different, masters coming up into Tibet. And then there was one which had melded the different traditions and created this combination of Tibetan Buddhism is unlike other Buddhisms. It's not this, it doesn't have this kind of ascetic quality to it. Even though monks might take vows or something, some of them, marry. But besides that, it's very, animistic, magico-spiritual, in the sense of very interactive, and it has a lot of these, magical traditions to it, which a lot of them do come from Bon. So with that, I started looking into Bon practices. I started looking into some Indian, more Hindu practices, more towards the tantras, which are in line with this. And then around, I would say, a couple years later, I moved to California. And I was living in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I came across this woman. I forget how I found her, but she was hosting a shamanism class to learn shamanistic practices. And it was out of her house. And she was right nearby. It was like 15 minutes away. And I decided to join. And so, I showed up not really knowing. And for me, shamanism, even though I knew a little bit, it was more towards, in my perspective or my expectation, it was more towards Native American or Native Americas / Siberian, rather than what it was for her, which was she was a Bon practitioner. And so that just kind of jogged everything. And I had never done any kind of drumming or anything like that. And, true to form for me, a lot of times when I first attempt practices, I have very profound experiences. And this was no different. My first journey, which is what you call it when you're, being guided. So I'm on the floor, on a cushion, and I'm with my eyes closed and listening to her drumming, and I'm, practicing. And my first one was really remarkable, and it was very Tibetan. And I think, well, for this format, I think I'm comfortable sharing it. It's not anything that needs to be hidden. It was just by surprise. I was actually just went underground and then was walking. And I was physically taken by my shoulders from behind and spun around. And for those of you who know Mahakala, which some people find scary, it's the most wonderful, sweetest thing. Pressed space right up against mine, nose to nose, eyes wild, wilder than you has ever been depicted, and sniffing, like snarling, and this energy, and like again, I was just spun around, and all of a sudden, this is in my face and like holding me. And there was just like this huge opening in my heart center. And it was just like, all I can say is this was a long lost friend. Yeah, hadn't seen for a while. And it had all the love of I don't want to diminish him by saying a pet, because it was more ferocious than any tiger or lion or wild animal that you could conceive of. It was just, there's something which I always say, and it's very true even in this instance, when you're trying to put uh, spiritual concepts into a linear kind of conversation, into a physical conversation. There's so much more. It was multisensory and it was outside of time. And anyway, I had a profound experience, and I came out of it. She said, "How was it?" And I said, "Good, but I don't think I should talk about this." And yeah, and then I did it again later on. We had another session, and that one was interestingly Native American, but it was more a lot more detail, and I won't go into that. Maybe at some other point. But it was also very interesting and quite profound in a very different way. And so for me, well, first I had to digest all of this, right? Because I'm younger and don't really have references, and there are things that are showing up and things that are grabbing me, and things just didn't mesh. It wasn't supposed to be, right. And not your first time too. And she even said that, how are you having these experiences in your first time? She was a little, just surprised by it. And yeah, it was just really interesting. So I digested it, and I decided once again, well, let me look into these, other aspects. So yeah, so I kind of have stayed with that. I started going to more of the magical and Hermetic practices. So I started going down the road of Bardonian Hermetics. For those of you who are familiar with Hermetics, there are a lot of different kind of branches, or what I guess is commercially available. A lot of people are familiar with the Kabbalion, which is more, in my interpretation, it's more like universal laws and broad stroke universal workings, with rhythm and so polarization and things like that. Then there are there's the more magical kind of practices. And there are a couple of different camps that exist, and you can explore them as you wish. There's the Crowley traditions, right? And some other kind of more reserved lodges, if you will. For a long time, these things really needed to be hidden. And so for sometimes they still do. It's not everything is for the public. And so, yes, I went into the Bardonian branch, and which is a little more self-directed, a little more self-empowering, but much more difficult in some ways. And so, yeah, so I went down that road, and I've continued with that, as well as a mixture of Tibetan Buddhism, and I will say not necessarily Tibetan Buddhism, but again, over time and even recently, even very, very recently, I'm looking at something and I'm attracted to a particular depiction or a particular practice. Or when I was living in the Bay Area, I was going through Santa Cruz, and I just was driving down the road and decided, I saw this little, I think it was like a Botanica type shop, where they sell herbs and candles and stuff. And I was just passing, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to pull over. I just felt the need to pull over. And I pulled over, walked in, did a circle around the store, looked at the case, saw this medallion in the case, saw that it had some kind of Sanskrit or Tibetan, writing on it, took it home, put it away, honestly, for years. I don't know why, just pulled it out. And when I did, I actually decided to decipher and look at what it is. And time again, I'm attracted to Dzogchen and the Vajrayana traditions, which are quite interesting and really dovetail into a lot of what I'm doing now. And so again, I haven't practiced these in a very formal way. I haven't practiced these from start to finish or decided to go and join a monastery, although I do and have joked about that for many, many, many years, because I do have a very kind of introverted, kind of hermit type aspect. I shouldn't say introverted. I actually heard a different variation of it. There's something in between that I heard someone talking about, an introvert and extrovert. And that's actually where I fall, because I'm very comfortable being in the midst of a crowd, in the midst of a bunch of people and, shining there. But to recharge, I do need to have alone time. And for me, that's best spent in nature or even at home. Anyway, so to continue, so I moved around a lot, was living in California. I started getting into herbalism and started getting into plant medicine and communicating with plants and trees, communicating with different concepts of consciousness, and had really wonderful experiences with that. And this led me to explore quite a bit and incorporate quite a bit and slowly collect and create my own way of working. So I also went into astrology, dabbled in that a little bit, decided I didn't want to become an astrologer, but of course find the value in it. And then it was kind of a mixture of different practices, a mixture of different things doing and taking on. I also got into Taoism, very much so. So I'm skipping that, but that was kind of all along the way. I think that really started when I was in the Bay Area. And I started practicing Qigong, and I started practicing different Taoist internal arts, both Mantak Chia's lineage, but then also as well as some others too. And so I've had this kind of this hodgepodge, I don't want to diminish it by saying hodgepodge, because, I was recently saying to someone, many people will look at what I do or even look at how I work. And it's like, from the outside, from someone who's very linear in their thinking or their processes, it's like I'm picking up this and I'm picking up that and I'm picking up this and I'm picking up that, and there's 15 different things, and they're like, but what are you doing? This doesn't all go together. And I'm like, but what are you looking at? Of course this goes together. And it's not until I bring them all together and I bring them up all at once that then a lot of people can see all of the different overlaps, right? All of the different overlaps, all of the different, how they fit each within another, and the different aspects of ones that fit, and how one resolves or adds to or enhances another, right? And so this is kind of what I've been finding completely for myself, with no intention of any of you. No offense, I'm very happy to be here. One thing that has come up too, and I'm skipping, I skipped, is with that. So I never expected to share all of this when I say with all of you. I expected to be of service, but in a different way. In my late 20s, I started writing a book, and I was very into self-help, and I was very into personal transformation. I spent over 5 years at a place called Landmark in New York City. Some people love it, some people don't. It did a lot for me. Did a lot of NLP and a lot of understanding of the mind and understanding of the energies and how these things even interact. And I also did Reiki, and I did a bunch of things. There was a lot that came together towards my late 20s and early 30s. I went to this course to write a book. And I was young and I didn't have the confidence then, and it was kind of shot down, not by the person who was instructing it, but by the class. They kind of didn't understand my concept. And it was, again, right, I was pairing different things that didn't seem like they should go together. So they meant well. What I learned later was you don't share things until you have a solid foundation. And so, yeah, I'm not blaming them because I didn't have a solid foundation. And there were other aspects to that it just, the idea and the inspiration came, but it wasn't the right time because I wasn't ready and I had to get ready. And there was nothing stopping me. It was just me. And I had to go through my own process. And, I had to battle myself. I had to resolve certain things. I had to put what I had learned into practice. And I had to go through certain experiences and growing pains, which I'm so thankful for now, as cliche as it may sound because everybody says that, but it's true. It really shaped me. I was an egomaniac when I was quite young, and that's pretty much gone. So moving forward of how we got here, I always planned on being a writer, and I always planned on writing and speaking. But when I started that conversation, what I was looking to do were the people that I saw. So write a book, right? This is 90s thinking, right? Write a book, maybe tour at some bookstores. Maybe if it's successful, speak once on TV, right? That was the goal. And life started changing rapidly. And then social media started coming in, which I was not into. And then just a lot of different things. And I had a ton of changes and moved around a lot and had a lot of experiences, really wonderful experiences. And, again, just getting ready. So I'll sum this up because we're going over time. A couple of months ago, actually almost a year ago, I started channeling. And I just was doing it for me, was going to see if I could do it, see if I can get it to work, right? And it was spotty at the beginning for like the first 2 sessions. And then I would say like maybe 3 or 4 sessions in, it just started working. And yeah, so I was channeling my guides and some other, this group of 32, they were called, which I'm very, very much connected to. And I was doing it completely for myself. And what I learned was that most people, at least that I see, and that most of us who are familiar with the channeling world, which is growing and increasing these days, and there are all kinds of channelers channeling all kinds of people and entities, online. Most people tend to do one person, one being, one entity, or a couple, or a group. And just out of curiosity, because again, I was just doing it for myself, like in my bedroom, by myself, for my own curiosity, for my own interest, for my own growth. I decided, let me see if I can just call in other people, other ones. And so I thought, well, what should I do? So I did what I called my greatest hits. Basically, the ascended masters, who we all know by name, who I resonated with. And yeah, it was really interesting. Completely personal conversations, if you will. I don't know what else to call it. Transmissions, I guess. That were completely for me. And what's really interesting is a lot of the more profound ones in my experience of it happening, because I'm conscious, usually. The more profound that it is, generally, the more of a time warp, if you will, that I feel. And so my experiences becomes very long gaps in between the words, to the point that I actually become uncomfortable because I become aware again of this like huge gap, right, in my experience. And then choppy words. And then I'm like, and I start to again become aware, and it's almost like, what the hell is, what the hell am I bothering with here? Fortunately, for a lot of them, especially as time went on, managed to disconnect and stay out of it. Those are the ones that are the most profound. And I still would say not to give a hierarchy, especially in my work. You'll see that's a big deal. But the most profound one was the one that I least expected to have. I was coming across all of this Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, Mary Magdalene and Yeshua, and even Bashar, channeled by Daryl Anka. He's talking about it, and it's like, I have removed myself so much from anything Christian, and there was another channeler I was speaking with, and she brought it up once, and I was like, it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And it was like, Mary Magdalene, Yeshua, Yeshua, and I don't know what made me think, so I decided to call her in, because I wasn't going to call him in. And my experience was, it was maybe 5 minutes long, the recording. I would headphones, voice memos. That's what I do. I record them, and I've got probably 80 of them now. And I record the sessions, and it was like, I thought it was crap. I thought it was pointless. I remember interjecting something, which I did. Sometimes it's a multisensory thing for me, especially as time has gone on. So usually it will just come through kind of my voice, and it's my left side. It's hard to describe. It's me relaxing, and kind of it just comes through. But I will occasionally be shown scenes, and sometimes the description comes with a scene, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I'll be shown a word, and if I say that word, it comes right in line with like the sentence. It's like it falls into place. It's a very interesting process. It's evolved, and I did speak a little slower at the beginning. It was a little more choppy, right? Now it's much more flowing. But this I thought was like crap. And I remember ending it, and I was actually like annoyed, and I was like, oh, and I'm projecting. I know she's supposed to be a whore, and she said that she was a whore, and like whatever. And I took it off, and I remember I was gonna like delete it. Didn't pay any attention to it. Probably like a month goes by. I pick up my phone, and I'm looking through the voice memos for something, and it was like a little below what, or a little above what I was looking at, caught my eye. My eye went over, and I saw 37 minutes. I was like, 37 minutes? That was maybe 5 minutes. I listened to it. I was like, it was wonderful, and it was beautiful, and was not choppy. And yes, there's this one part. Anyway, I don't have to go into it because I just wrote a book about it. And I'm not saying it to sell the book. I'm just saying it was that profound for me. The emphasis was not at all, she did everything she could to take her emphasis on her, off of him, off of Yeshua. I decided much later, probably like after I realized what this was, probably like a month after that, I finally decided to see if I could contact him. Had a really similar experience, knocked me out. I was like half asleep. I was mumbling. I thought that there was nothing useful. I wound up being able to enhance the recording and get the whole message in detail, fully. Really, really beautiful, really profound, completely not expected. in no way like neo-Christian anything. I'll just say that totally iconoclastic, total emphasis off of themselves, emphasis onto a practice that's helpful. That's the basis of the book. The book is called The Reflection Connection, and that's the name of the podcast as well. The podcast is not based on the book. The Reflection Connection was a name that I created all those years ago, 20 something years ago. And I had started this book and started formulating the book and was piecing together things, and it just was never 100%. And what they gave me was the missing component to it. It was the working practice in a really profound and functional way. And it shifted everything for me. And what it shifted is, and I'll end with this, what it shifted was we live in a much more inclusive universe without this hierarchy. And a lot of us, because of our day and age, a lot of us who are more sensitive and open-minded want to say, yeah, live and let live. This is your practice. This is my practice. This is what you're doing, or I've done a couple of different things, or whatever. But from what I'm seeing, from what I'm experiencing, it's not like an either or. It's like everyone and everything is conspiring to lift you. Truly, everything and everyone you've ever heard of, everything that's ever been is trying to lift you, trying to supporting this whole thing, everything moving in love. Everyone and everything is available. Everything is available to everyone. And with the times that we're in, which I don't think are so horrible, and we'll get to that another day. I know a lot of people have a horrible experience. I'm not discounting that. But we live in a wonderful world, and we live in a wonderful universe. And you are connected to so much more than you realize. And you are so much more than you realize. And so if everyone can just take a piece of that and really take it in, really, really take it in, then my work is done. But I'm also a chatty Gemini. And I've got a lot to say, a lot to share, and also a lot of wisdom that I kind of just kept to myself for all these years. Books and books and books and books. My God, you have no idea the amount of reference that I've accumulated and notes that I've accumulated in all of these different books. Just for the book alone, I had like 9 different full notebooks from forever ago until recently. There's a part of Hermetics, especially as I share the tradition that I was a part of and still am to a certain degree. 3 pillars that everything stands on, and one of them is silence. And for a very long time, that was necessary because of a multitude of different reasons. Not only hundreds of years ago, but this is a more recent tradition. This was a 20th century tradition. And not only 100 years ago, this needed to be silent, but the energies that we're all existing in were different. We turned a corner. It's another conversation for another day, and a lot of you might know this, but we turned a corner, and everything is different than what it was 5 years ago, and before that, everything is different than what it was 12 years ago. And so I was told repeatedly, and more recently especially, that I'm to no longer keep it to myself, but to best serve is to share, and to share openly and share everything. And there are just a few exceptions to that, but there's a ton. And so we'll be breaking it down. This was an intro and I really babbled on. I am happy to be here. I'm really honored, really, truly. I'm not just saying that. This is an offering. And I am going to just be me starting out. So it's a little messy, but I'm going to be me. And I am just going to flow like a fountain. And whoever wishes to come and drink may. Either way, my fountain flows. So in future episodes, I plan on giving teachings as well as very specific takeaways that you can enact. My intention is not just to be up here speaking, but to create a community where you have the opportunity to experience these things, to be exposed to maybe some different concepts that you might not be, or to hear about it in a different way that maybe you had. There are a ton of practices and a ton of things that I do that I haven't touched on, and I've kind of touched on a bunch. It's just time doesn't permit. And a lot, I think, a lot of these would have a lot of profound value, regardless of your age and where you are. And so I'm leaving this episode as it is for the most part. In the future episodes, I think in the next couple, I'm going to play with bear with me. We're just starting and we're just starting together. So I hope you'll come and join me again. And I'm going to play with sharing some practices, specific practices that are universally safe and will provide a lot of benefit for a lot of different people that are somewhat energetic, as well as ways to connect to nature and our environment. And and then we'll kind of go from there. We'll let it evolve. Over time, I would love to hear your comments. So please go ahead and leave any comments. I would love to hear what you would like, or if you needed any kind of clarity on anything. So again, I'll emphasize that as we go along. But just so happy to be here, and I hope that you'll join me again. Again, my name is Vince Jameson, and this is the Reflection Connection with Vince Jameson. This is the Reflection Connection podcast with Vince Jameson. So until next time, my friends, be well. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please go ahead and click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And until next time, the one takeaway I can give you is to do your best to pay attention to your environment and to keep your focus on that which is working. My light just went out. That which is working, that which is positive, that which is beautiful, that which is flowing. Because so much of the outside noise is trying to guide our attention to what they might want us to look at. And a lot of it is fear-based, and a lot of it is negative. It's not a conspiracy theory to understand that negative news sells more. And so it is what it is. But guide your attention. You have control over your attention. You have control over where you decide to put your attention. And the more that you can guide that, the more that your days can flow, and the more that what you interact with and what you flow with, and it enables you to create a bit of a bubble, which is necessary these days. Not to be disconnected from life, not to put your head in the sand or be complacent, but to create a buffer zone for yourself where you're continually looking at what's positive, what's working, what's beautiful, it's, the glass half empty or glass half full. And that will feed you, and that will help you to create a kind of an energy, a buffer around yourself that can help to stabilize. And even if you kind of get bumped into or get, put off track, you're overall more robust in your energy. So I'll leave you with that. Until next time.